Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Susan Linder, your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show. Today, we're going to have a discussion about change. How much do we want it? How much do our audiences want it? How comfortable are we with going through these radical shifts in our own development in order to get to the innovations and in order to have the rest of the market say yes to the innovations that we're proposing? So I'm very fortunate to have a fellow ILO member. Shout out to our friend Peter Temis out there at the Institute for Innovation at Large Organizations. Joe Salesky is joining me today. And if you don't know Joe, he is the founder and CEO of Fixing.World. Joe is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and inventor with extensive experience in leading really diverse teams to deliver valued and transformative innovation capable of operating at global scale. For more than 40 years, he has pioneered building simple solutions to very hard problems. And we're going to talk about that story paradigm today. And he's recognized for delivering exceptional value for customers, shareholders, and employees. He is a co-inventor of 27 patents for technologies that are broadly used by both consumers and large enterprises, including things you use every day, like mobile banking, and the original patent for web conferencing, like we're doing on Zoom right now. He is currently the co-founder and chief executive officer of Fixing.World, a media and technology company unlocking the potential of every person by using digital assets and platforms to disrupt inequity and systemic issues in society, funded by transforming marketing spend into both enhanced brand lift and essential community impact. Some of his prior achievements, if you don't know, include the development and successful deployment of mobile banking solutions for 9 of the top 12 US banks and the creation of award-winning mission-critical systems for more than half of the Fortune 500. As an executive with proven success in using innovation to deliver investor returns, his leadership roles include Oracle, N-Cube, acquired by SeaChange, Pixion, acquired by Drake International, AppStream, acquired by Symantec, and Clairmail, acquired by Fiserv. He also worked under the Clinton administration, was honored to be invited and serving as a founding member of the Intergovernmental Technology Leadership Consortium and benchmark leader in the Council for Excellence in Government, leading innovation in the use of the internet to make our government more efficient and more inclusive. And that, sir, is no easy task. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Joe.
Oh, Susan, thank you for having me. It's a long bio there. I hope everybody found something in there of interest.
Well, it's exhaustive, that's for sure. And I'm wondering if it's exhausting, only because to span that kind of entrepreneurial life, to span that governmental life and Fortune 500, I mean, these are waves. The stories you got to tell yourself to survive these environments, Joe, must be pretty engaging, I have to say. Having worked in nonprofit, government, corporate, and being a business owner myself, these are some pretty big waves to surmount, to surf.
Well, I think the potential of innovation to change the way we live, work, and play, to improve the human condition is significant. But the storytelling, as you said, I think your audience are people that are looking to get innovation to occur, looking to do the hard work of making change happen. And I think there are some things that you have worked across large organizations as an entrepreneur and entrepreneur, external to organizations, that I think are helpful to share. And I'm glad that you're doing the podcast. I'm honored to be on. You've had some terrific guests in the past. And I think the overall goal is to help each other move the ball forward. And it takes some passion. It definitely takes some compassion, and it takes good storytelling, because you can't do it alone. We've got to get organizations to move forward. And as we were talking about a little bit before the show, I think there's a lot of people that want change, but that no one really likes it. It disrupts the status quo. There's a journey to get change, to market. And how do we get people on the Mayflower and get them to stay on the Mayflower, right? I mean, that was a long journey itself with Christopher Columbus. I don't know that everybody uses that analogy anymore, but I think—
You mean the Pilgrims, right?
Yeah,
Christopher
yeah.
Columbus got lost some other place, but yeah.
So you think about that happens in every innovation journey, but But what I found across all of these different approaches to different organizations is that part of the key is picking which innovation you do. And I think, that a simple rubric to really know whether or not something is a simple solution to a hard problem. Would you be a personally passionate user of it? Is it easy to fund? The selection bias, since organizations can only handle so much change. Most large organizations are very lucky to have 3 innovations in a year. And the question is, which innovations will those be? And how do they overcome the organizational inertia? How do they have enough value coming quickly enough to get people to believe that where failed innovation has happened before, that this one won't fail, right? We're all, as storytellers, dealing with people's internal story. And most of that internal story is, oh, great idea. We've tried these before. We couldn't get them across the line. Or, oh, that's got to get people to change. And I think people have a certain amount of belief that you have to help them overcome that belief that there's difficulties or that things haven't worked before. And why is this going to work? Why wasn't this done before? There's some of the things that we've chatted about. I think some of that core is what's changed that made this innovation now possible. I think a lot of us think, oh, we've come up with a new way of doing it. And you've got to be very cautious as a storyteller in the story you're telling yourself. Is this idea something that others haven't thought of? Why now? Right? Why wasn't this innovation done before? Was everybody in the organization blind to the potential? I mean, though there is that possibility, it's not that likely, right? They're normally for disruptive innovation. We mentioned web conferencing. So web conferencing, the internet happened. There was this opportunity to deliver content to others. And it was fascinating because when I first met Mark Andreessen, it was Mosaic becoming Netscape. And for those that are on the podcast that have been around a little bit, the dawning of the internet now about 30 years ago. And Mark said it's content, content, content. And I was smiling, going, the killer app in the early internet was email, that we could communicate more effectively. And yes, content is just like this podcast is a form of communication. But most of the time, we were all on conference calls when we were having meetings in between in-person meetings. And you could hear each other, but you couldn't see what the other person was talking about. And so the idea that we could use a web server as a meeting place, but we had to do what was impossible and make it possible. The information that was on your computer screen was too big to fit through a modem connection, harkening back. So how do we do visual communication in real time when you've got a bitmap on your screen or other things that was large? And some of that was some breakthrough innovation in compression technology that we had in the patents. But coming back to that rubric I was talking about, travel to meetings is important. There's no replacement for face-to-face meetings. And we're having one right now because the bandwidth has improved and we can do, but even with this technology, getting people together, synchronous communication, ideation, happens, when we're in, and there's a lot of nonverbal communication that occurs, et cetera. But, the opportunity to travel the net instead of traveling in a jet was really something, a personal passion for me. I had traveled a ton rolling out the first streaming video with the big telcos before the dawn of the internet. And you sort of looked at, gosh, we were going into a meeting room or plugging a laptop into a projector and projecting on the wall. But coming back to it, simple solution to a hard problem, something I would be a personally passionate user of. How do you, easy to fund compared to aircraft flights, which weren't cheap, but you still had to get organizations to be willing to make the change, to believe that the innovation. So the story that we had to tell was going after things that were very costly and couldn't be done frequently enough. So our first customer for web conferencing was B of A. So first I had to prove the impossible was possible to get investors.
All right, so that's step one, right?
Yes.
Prove the impossible is possible. So that, are we talking, as you're going through this story, are we talking about demos? Are we talking about rolling out a whole slew of technical specs? Are we saying, are we establishing first and foremost that this is a problem to our audience, that they are exhausted, that they are overpaying, that they are losing valuable time, money, et cetera? Like, what's the order of how you get this story straight for something that we all know today and love is web conferencing like this? Like, how did you start off the story?
So part of it, the story needed a demo where somebody could see the impossible was now possible. The same, by the way, is true with ChatGPT. The impossible is now possible. So people need proof of concept.
Because we're so skeptical by nature, is that it? We're so hesitant to change.
Well, I think there's two things. One is people are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, right? The way that we accept information. And so I think a lot of people have to feel that it's possible and see that it's possible, not just hearing about the problem. So the people knew they were on a conference bridge, but people knew it wasn't working well. That early days of the internet, and finally we could at least send presentations and you could try to get people to turn the page of the presentation, but you couldn't do a demo. You couldn't do a lot of other things that people wanted to do.
Yeah.
And yet video conferencing rigs, Picture.Tell was out at that time and others, people had not had good experiences. They were very expensive. You had to go to a room to do it. It wasn't very good at screen sharing. It was hard to get the call established. So the problem was technology before it was hardware intensive. It wouldn't run on Mac and PC easily. And just to give you a time check, the browser had come out. People were used to installed apps, and we were starting to see access to content on the web, access to different applications on the web. So the paradigm was shifting. But coming back to it, I think people understood that communication was one of the lifebloods of business. People understood that
Of any relationship, right? I mean, it's just that is the cornerstone of how humans function. That's why storytelling matters as opposed to here's an Excel spreadsheet, figure it out.
So, right. And so much happens in a collaborative environment. And so you sort of look at proposing ideas, getting feedback, and getting people early in a process. So, but coming back to this, proving the impossible is possible. So back then, connections to the internet were varied at best. Slow would have been the people waiting.
Incredibly unreliable.
And unreliable. So you had to be able to prove that you could get a meeting to occur where the technology would be helping the meeting, not disrupting the meeting. Even conference bridges back then, when people who went through the pandemic on Zoom, people leaving their mic hot, doing other things that were some of the challenges of a group dynamic now.
I mean, wholly inappropriate, like not wearing pants? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
all of those things. I mean, in the early days of web conferencing, we were more screen sharing than we were live video. But you had to show people that there were use cases where that was immediately of value and that there wasn't a huge learning curve to get it started. So again, coming back to this, the impossible is possible, literally showing people on their own computer that they could click on a link and be in a meeting. So we put capacity on the backbone of the internet so people could see the value of the technology in their world. But coming back to we had to get VCs on board. So I built a prototype, skunkworked the prototype with a graduate student honors class. But again, storytelling there. You're going to get a bunch of grad students to drop a point on their GPA to work on a project to make something that was impossible possible, real-time communication over the internet. So you have to, again, storytelling is always there. They had to believe that they could change the world with this technology. And by the way, not every innovation is web conferencing, but they are. I mean, I see it episodically when you look at ChatGPT, you think of other innovations that we all take for granted today, mobile, et cetera. Most of there's the technology piece of innovation that we talk about, right? And then there's the adoption piece of innovation that, how are you going to get the early adopters? So our first customer for web conferencing was B of A. Why? because Bank of America is a very distributed organization. They've got branches all over the place. Banking is run on technology. They have to train people on these systems. It was when they're constantly deploying changes to systems and new systems. In banking, there's a system for every product, the credit card system, the debit
Sure.
card system. So how do you help people know these systems and learn these systems? And, again, hearkening back a little bit, self-led training, CBT is what they use, computer-based training is what they used to call it.
Mhm.
Now we're doing all sorts of other online courses. But, the course gives you content, but it doesn't necessarily answer your questions. You learn in a group dynamic from questions others you didn't think to ask, that others ask. So there is some value in that group dynamic. That's why trainings were being done in addition to the self-paced stuff, exposure to the platform. But so for B of A, showing them that they could do a training to a branch or to groups of branches without friction, without someone traveling, making the trainings more available at different times of day. Again, being a much more efficient way of delivery. And they were an incredibly happy customer. When, amazing enough, banks had networks. They had computing systems, and most of what they were doing is trying to teach people in a graphical user interface how to use a system.
Mhm.
So you've got to show and do. So they were very, very early adopter. Interesting enough, the biggest user of the internet back in the beginnings of the internet was the government. So our second customer was Lawrence Livermore Labs. They were collaborating with research scientists, and that led to us becoming an asset in the government, where different areas of government had meetings all the time, and we all suffered through death by meetings. Can you imagine what those meetings were like when they were just a conference call?
Oh
You know,
yeah, endless polycom, right? And whether or not you push the mute button or not.
yeah,
Uh, this was the big question every day. It's like, did you really hit mute? Did he really hear that? So
but
yeah,
that story arc over and over again is it a simple solution to a hard problem? You
is it
know,
a simple solution to a hard problem? And can we get it down to a basic number of words that allow us to articulate the value and address the pain point that our listener is really feeling? Yeah, I spent a lot of time talking about the emotionality of story, even in very corporate, very scientific contexts, because we need to break through all the dross to get to what is the heart that will actually allow people to change. Because it's not just about, wow, that's a really cool idea. The act of getting adoption of an idea is a change of heart, not just head. And I think a lot of business leaders leave out the hard part. If you actually want to empower people and inspire people to change, it's not enough. I think so many times we think about who our next hire is going to be, and we want that to be someone who's self-motivated. And that's right. Self-motivated to do the job description. But to get people to take up innovation on top of their block and tackle, their day-to-day work, you actually need to fuel a different fire than this is what I signed up for.
exactly. And do you want, we want to grow business, grow sales, but are we always going to grow by growing headcount? I mean, in a competitive labor force, how are we adding efficiency to our business?
Right.
And decouple revenue growth or profit growth from headcount growth. It's not about necessarily letting people go. It's about making people more productive so we can do more business without having to always hire, right? And getting out of that, for 2% growth, it's going to require 2% headcount growth. I mean, technology, systems, processes are there so that we can get return on effort that's not just static, right? We're trying to improve the return on effort or decrease the effort required to do something. So again, I think when you talk about people being an innovation storyteller, there's got to be a question. Innovation for innovation's sake doesn't have any value, right? Technology is a tool. And my favorite analogy is an airplane gives you about 100x your capacity. The average person walks at 3 to 5 miles per hour, right? The average aircraft travels at 3 to 500 miles per hour. Whether you're 8 or 80, it's going to transport you much more effectively. how is this innovation going to transport the organization more effectively? What changed? The discovery of the jet engine, right? Or the Wright brothers discovering the ability to create low pressure on the top of a wing and get a plane to rise. The discovery is there. Something changed. There was an aha moment, right, in air travel. There was an aha moment in the multiple aha moments in the early days of the internet. I think bringing it forward to today, right? We talked about it, the ahas of web conferencing, mobile banking. Here, all of a sudden, everybody was carrying a mobile device, and it wasn't just a voice device, but early on, text messaging became a primary communication form. Again, you sort of look at what happened on the internet, what started to happen on mobile, but it was different. You were only on the internet when you were at work or when you were on the internet at home. Mobile was with you all the time. It was allowing you to recapture lost time when you're driving in the car or you're sitting waiting for an appointment. You could call somebody or text someone, right? It made you more accessible. In early days of the BlackBerry, it made you more productive if you could respond to all those emails. But the problem on that mobile device, small screen, smaller keyboard, you couldn't run apps on it necessarily. So how is it going to unlock potential? But again, I want to bring back that so much of the success in innovation storytelling is which stories you choose to tell, which innovations you choose to go after, and was there something that changed platform-wise, internet, mobile, now AI, that now makes innovations that weren't possible more possible? Because I do think there are ideas that people just didn't have. A new way of looking at a business. It occurred for me early in my career inside a big insurance company where we didn't really understand the process of processing a claim, time and motion study, and hadn't really looked at the process to see process improvement. But that said, in most cases, I think you've got to look at what's changing technologically and not looking for I always look at like blockchain technology and solution this in search of a problem. The payment networks were working, PayPal and Square and others were making payment networks work more effectively. Visa networks have been well deployed for a long time. Did we need blockchain as a payment network? Did we need a cryptocurrency? And I think that's still, at least in our economy, in the Western economies, still the jury's out on is blockchain going to be disruptive in corporate America? Is it going to become a primary payment platform? So there was a technology in search of a problem. What had changed? Was there something substantive that had changed in the needs of the payments world that were being unmet? I think that one's a harder story to tell. So I think the selection in AI now is there's no question that ChatGPT has convinced people that generative AI is possible. Now the question is, where does that make what was impossible now possible? Not just minor improvements. I mean, those will get adopted, those can get socialized. I guess the question will be, what is innovation, right? I mean, is it minor process improvement, minor tool use, or is it really creating a new economic model for your business? Is it creating a new type of product that didn't exist before? And I think in the world of AI, there's going to be a disruption in employment, right? Work people do. Is that AI going to help redeploy those folks? There's one company I'm talking to right now that's really looking at the changing dynamic of organizations. So human capital is what drives most organizational success. How do we get the right people into the right jobs long term? How do we predict our needs long term? And is generative AI, or actually ML, going to be much more predictive in what do we need in our business? What is keeping us from doubling our business, the size of our business? So again, making this very useful and very tactical. How you select simple solution to a hard problem. So one of the questions I always ask is, what's the barrier to doubling our business? right? If you use sort of an aspirational goal,
Mm.
in a business, then you'll start to look at what are the highest priority inhibitors of growth. Is it price, or is it something else in our business that is really keeping us from growing? Is it getting the word out? Is there just insufficient demand for fossil fuel cars? And we're trying to get people over to EVs, but there's an insufficient EV. I mean, that's still, there's innovation there with what's happened in battery technology, but along with it has been competing innovation in the efficiency of cars, gas engines, and hybrid technology, and the things that hold back some of that change. I think Elon Musk did a great job of telling a story of a new type of car that you could charge at your home off of solar. I won't get into some of the challenging political discussions that may come, but I think it did catalyze people believing what was impossible was possible, that we could.
Yeah, because the electric car had been around for a really long time. I remember in 1996, I was living in Bangkok. Actually, I was living in rural Thailand. I was just visiting HQ in Bangkok. And my boss asked me if I wanted to test drive an electric vehicle. And it was amazing because it was so quiet. I couldn't even hear it coming down the street. And I said, show me the battery. Because I was so perplexed. So they opened the hood, there was almost nothing in there. And he took out what was a credit card sized. And I was like, how is that possible that this is running this thing? And granted, you had to charge it, but the battery itself was removable. You didn't plug a charger into the car. You took the battery out and charged it every night, which seemed like a flawless idea, except for my ability to lose my keys twice a week in my own house. But thinking like, oh wow, I not tell you, I can't find the keys to my car. I also can't find the battery that powers it. But I thought, wow, that was 1996 in Southeast Asia.
Mhm.
And yet it took how many more cycles and battles against lobbyists and to create regulatory environments and incentive environments and so many other ecosystems that had to be built in order to allow that success process to take place. And it's a good reminder, the electric vehicle discussion, because it doesn't just happen with one great story. If I can just pound that into the heads of my listeners, is that there are many, many stories that need to be told and overlap with one another as part of a larger strategy in order to get lots of players to the table to actually make something happen.
Well, and I'll give you an immediately applicable, no cost or low cost innovation everybody can deploy today that should have a 5% effect on revenue growth. It's a fascinating two words change. But part of your innovation can line up underneath this. So how do people in a B2C business or in your business greet each other? Hi, I'm Joe. I can help you. I don't say, can I help you? I say, I can help you. I start the conversation, the interaction with a commitment, right? That I then try to live to, right? If I say, I can help you, you say, oh, that's great. I need to do X, right? And part of the goal of the organization is to make it possible for the human that's interacting with other human to live up to that promise. I can help you.
My therapist is flipping out right now, thinking that you have no boundaries, Joe. Setting boundaries. Hi, I'm Susan. I can help you. It's like, great, get me a cup of coffee. Like,
Yeah.
we also need to be realistic as innovators, right? About what we can and can't do, because people hear the word innovation and everyone thinks you're inventing the iPhone.
Yeah. And but I mean, there's an example of truly just inventing a word switch. Can I help you? I can help you. You're starting off with a commitment. Now, can I help you be a millionaire? Well, maybe I can introduce you to someone or something along those lines. But really, our goal in human interaction is to know someone, to build trust, and to be of service, right? That's where organizations are. Another simple solution to a hard problem, the trillion book gift, is something we're doing at Fixing.World. We're talking about digital goods affecting the physical world. 50% of children in the US have no books in their home. It's about 70% of kids globally. During early childhood, 90% of brain growth is happening. Okay, so here's a really significant problem in our world. And if you want to know why climate change or lack of empathy, half of the children are getting under enriched early in childhood, infant and toddler, when
Under enriched.
and that means they're less able to acquire knowledge later. So they have trouble learning to read. Their early childhood repetitive reading of own books is really about brain development. Now, it's exposure to language. It's not teaching the child to read, but there's a social emotional component to it, and there's a cognitive development component to it. But the reason I bring it up is it's a big problem. It's a trillion book problem. So that's books for kids over 10 years, more than we spend on defense in the US. Okay, if you look at the size of the problem, how would we solve that? Why has government not solved it? Well, it's a big problem. But you look at digital books and the fact that everybody has a mobile phone. So, okay, we could do the distribution, but how do people find out about it? So part of the aha is how do we help now with digital and mobile? And the new parent audience is a very valuable audience to insurers, to banks, to certain types of brands. How do we help the marketer make the impossible possible? How do we engage with value that matters, right? How do we build trust into a relationship and strength of a brand and a relationship in a very, very noisy world? And so part of this is in most initiatives, what you give away as a marketing incentive has a high cost. In fact, the hat that a bank gives you or somebody gives you probably costs more than you value it, right? I mean, you think about somebody puts a logo on their cap and gives it away as an incentive for you to remember them, or you think about that's incentivized engagement, and that's not value that necessarily matters. But giving away 50 books in 50 languages with instant delivery is something that's now possible. That's $250 in books that we make possible for $2.50, right? So very asymmetric value. And then the marketer has the ability to send encouragement, has the ability to send certificates of achievement through the platform. What I'm getting at is we've created these ways to hyperscale efficiency in many cases, but we haven't done that in the world of impact. And what I've realized is that marketers have a huge job, right? I mean, at the end of the day, every business survives on top of funnel, new business, and growth in relationships. And yet, across all the banks I've worked with and others, how do you deliver that high value customer in a way that's genuine and valued? How do you get them to engage and get into some feeling of that brand? So giving forward instead of giving back is sort of an interesting approach to solving what is a global issue. Interesting thing about books that have high value to the affluent and the aspirational. So you have digital books have a very good value there. And so huge opportunity for your listeners if they're interested to unlock value. For every 4,000 downloads, they'll put $1 million in books into the community while growing their business. So that's something that's been missing, hyperscale of impact when it's aligned with business growth. I just want to give, that's not meant to be overly a plug, but an example that is now possible that wasn't possible before. Some of that is the distribution networks, all the different flavors of advertising, and the fact that now a QR code or a social media link can deliver a lot of value. So having the value, it doesn't get the awareness of the value. So finding partnerships, in this case, aligning with marketers, so that their outreach through social and others, they can be, part of a trillion book gift and build some equity in a relationship, by doing something genuine, not, and then you can look at different enhancements to that, learn to earn, tied into their loyalty program or others. We're talking with the NFL Players Association about players amplifying this importance of early childhood. But you're starting a journey with a high LTV audience. So I think those types of innovations and how we tell that story and how someone else tells that story on your behalf are some of the keys. Understanding the very fundamental, who doesn't want children to succeed, right? I mean, very often we see technology taking away social interaction and a bunch of others. So delivering digital books for side-by-side reading between a caregiver and a child and repetitive reading of own books is different than once that child starts to love books or love reading, you can go to the library or you can use Libby and download books. But that early childhood experience is repetitive reading of the same book because the child's engagement changes the more times you read the book. They go from a passive observer to an active participant to demonstrating mastery. So I bring that up because I think there's a way of hacking inequity, right? And doing it in a way that the marketing spend in the US is getting close to what we spend on defense. There's a lot of money invested in marketing, but how do you get somebody to go from awareness to engagement to transaction? How do you take them on that journey?
Well, and we think about certainly DEI initiatives and equity and inclusion. Are books always the way in? Is that how you think about starting the engagement?
So I think the DEI has had its challenges, right? Because is it inclusion to the exclusion of others or others? And I think inequity starts early. And part of what I saw was an inflection point in inequity. 50% of kids have no age appropriate books in their home during early childhood. They're not getting
50%?
50%. There's a Dr. Dana Susskind wrote a book, 30 million words. I mean, it's a real problem. And part of the problem is paper books are not cheap. There are definitely book giveaways. Dolly Parton does one, etc. But not all families speak English as their first language. So part of that, you have resistance in the reader. How do you get supportive culture and supportive reading? And again, it's the storytelling that you're talking about. This is the beginning of storytelling, is parents reading to children. And it's a bonding opportunity, etc. But it elevates self-esteem and it elevates intellectual capacity. And I think that's at one of the root causes. Head Start, the science is that it tends to get there a little too late. That brain plasticity is starting to wane after age 4. And so you're not building the fabric for cognitive capacity that allows, and gosh, we live in a world now where whether it's ChatGPT or others, we do a lot of reading to access information and asking questions. So reading is definitely underneath it, but the early childhood books are social, emotional, and cognitive development, and it's the precursor to reading. It's exposure to language, exposure to numbers. So bringing that up as here, that's an innovation where we have to tell the story to brands for them to see the opportunity to engage with value that matters, right? And that's you really look at what does a brand need more than anything else but trust, to be valued, to be part of someone's life. And how does this fit in, right? And I think depending on the brand, that's where the creativity applies, is what else does it complement without taking away some of that opportunity. But I think there's going to be other ways to engage. I just think this is an area for most businesses, the new parent audience is very high lifetime value. If you think about it, when we first have children, we are changing some of our priorities. And our product needs change. And again, I don't want to overemphasize that. It's just one thing that does affect our world. It affects the future of the workforce and in the future of a lot of people's happiness. So I mean, I do think there's an ability to have a huge impact there. And but I think I wanted to bring that up because there's an innovation that's different than just saying I can help you, but as a way to engage people. Because again, I think the impossible becoming possible, having impact in the community. A lot of DEI initiatives were underneath marketing, but they weren't really aligned with, oh, you do these good things in the community, but they didn't scale very well. Whereas advertising or marketing on Facebook scales very well. So was there just something missing in DEI initiatives to get them to scale more effectively? And I think some of that is the use of digital goods to affect the physical world. So digital books and physical books really serve that same purpose. I mean, I love paper books, but carrying a diaper bag with children and everything else, how many books do you have with you? And the science is that you need a scatter of about 50 books in the home to find the art style and subject matter that both the caregiver and the child attach to, right? And that
Interesting. Yeah.
may evolve over time. But I'll maybe finish on a innovation in the hardest place possible, which is our government. Yeah, I know we're all experiencing a very visible political race. And the question is, what do people want from government? And are we getting an efficient delivery of goods and services from government? And it was interesting because Bill Clinton created this Council for Excellence in Government and drafted a few of us that were in technology because they wanted to look at how does the internet make government more efficient and more inclusive. Was an interesting mandate, especially given the fact that you had to get it done with government. Okay. And I mean, does it have a profit incentive? What are the things that make government go? And it was a fascinating challenge, right? How do we make government more efficient, more inclusive? The Federal Webmasters Alliance, getting government information readily available to consumers, not just forms in the post office or information in the library, but they had the Library of Congress, you had a lot of government information from all of these departments. How did you have access to it? So the first thing we did was said, hey, government was a big publisher. Mark Andreessen wasn't wrong. This is a way to make information more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
It is a publishing platform. So the Federal Webmasters Alliance was all about getting, the stuff online, right? And those organizations very quickly, already had the materials. They just needed to put them in a website instead of putting them, into a printed document, right? So they had a lot of information, and whether it was census or others, made that information much more accessible and reduced the government printing load dramatically. But that was the beginning of a storytelling, right? Let's get the information. The antagonists in that story were, how are people going to access it? So we looked at, well, let's make sure we wire the schools because they all had computer labs, and let's wire the libraries as a point of access and put computers in the libraries. So that made sure that people had a place to go. And for many people, even today, it's the place they go to print stuff, right? I mean,
Sure.
in the library, not everybody has a printer at home. So
My kids look at me like I have three heads when I say, "Hey, can you print that out for me?" And I ran out of ink in my printer like, I don't know, a month and a half ago, and I haven't done anything about it.
yeah. But coming back to the rubric for
Yeah.
this is before I came up with this, is it a simple solution to a hard problem? Doesn't do any good to have the government do research with the FDA or have all of these reports if people don't have access to it. So some of this was getting that information available. And then the next piece, by the way, was something that we did in mobile banking, which was alerts and the one-time PIN, in addition to other things. Not just having you go to the information, but having the information come to you. So
Mm.
people with a certain interest could subscribe to get updates. And all of a sudden, the government knew for the first time in history who needed their information, who wanted more of their information. And you had an ability not just to access information, but to put in requests, to start a conversation. That made government more efficient and more inclusive. Then we came up with the idea of the town hall meeting, because part of my belief, and part of it was because we had created web conferencing, but that government had to not just talk at people, but talk with people. And how do we do that and learn from each other's questions? So the town hall meeting became another example of the government becoming more efficient and more inclusive. And a lot of that efficiency would be to really understand and benefit from the ideas of constituents, not just lobbying and government looking at itself through a singular lens. But so, I mean, hopefully these are good examples. And again, what I want to bring everybody back to is in the story, you've got to, I apologize if I beat this one to death, but You've got to prove it's a simple solution to a hard problem.
Yep.
If you're not proving it's a simple solution to a hard problem, how are you going to overcome the negative inertia of the organization? How are you going to cost justify it? Because the truth when you start on a project is there's the cost that you anticipated and there's the cost that you didn't anticipate. There's the problems that you anticipated and there's the problems that you didn't anticipate. So you better have enough bolus of value to have it worth the journey. So if your initial delivery, your initial demo, your initial prototype takes more than 6 months, forget it. It's really going to be hard to sustain the voyage. And likelihood of completion, because the rate of change in requirements exceeds your rate of change in innovation. If you can collapse it to get less than 3 months to an initial proof of value, some piece of showing that it is possible, that it isn't impossible.
Right. And a 6-week check-in to let people know where you're at, because 3 months that's a whole quarter in the life of a company. And it's a lot.
Yeah. So the best is where you have a little, we'll just call it skunk works up demo or something early before you have a project, so that you can have a little piece of a proof point so people start to believe, oh, and they can sort of see it, not just hear about it, of how that solution can be brought to the forefront.
Well, Joe, this has been a fascinating discussion. So I'm now going to ask you the 3 questions I ask everyone who comes on the show. What is the greatest invention in human history? The greatest innovation?
I think it's such a hard one that I think I harken back to Alexander Graham Bell. He made it possible to have a conversation at a distance. It's permeates underneath. So I think communication and when that dialogue that we were able to have, but penicillin probably beats it in terms of its impact on humanity. But the conversations that probably subsequent to penicillin have helped the pharma world and others continue to innovate. So I was going to say Alexander Graham Bell on the phone and how it's evolved, but probably penicillin still wins.
If you had to join any innovation team in the course of human history, which team would you join?
I think the one that would have been the most fun to work on, I don't know that I would have been part of it, was the Manhattan Project. You look at the people that came together, was just everybody from Einstein to a phenomenal innovation team. But you think about and I do think it was not just about the atomic bomb, but there's huge breakthrough innovation in nuclear energy that's coming. There's a company I've been advising called AlphaTech with compact nuclear reactors that run on uranium salt, can't melt down, can't have a breach because of the way they're engineered with no mechanical cooling, and their waste product actually is medical isotopes and precious metals. So it's actually the waste is non-radioactive or not injurious radioactive. And so I think, sorry to over answer that question, but I think there's something about the Manhattan Project that was definitely an innovation team extraordinaire.
Yeah. Well, if you watched Oppenheimer, the fallout from the individuals who participated was vast and extensive as any bomb radius could have had for the humans, as much as it did for those impacted by those bombs falling, I think. Maybe not as much, but certainly impactful. So, and lastly, if there was an innovation you'd love to see in the world that doesn't yet exist, what would that be?
Yeah, so part of the reason I founded Fixing.World is I think what's broken in our world is empathy. And the otherism, if you really look at, so part of the reason behind the Trillion Book Gift was to start at the root cause of a failure of empathy, which is self-esteem and empathy go hand in hand. I think the opportunity to grow human capacity and give people the help in meeting their potential is this is a world made up of people that are going to help us improve our environment or destroy our environment. They're going to help us build economies and build opportunity or work to the other side. So I think part of why I'm excited about where AI is going is children today, young adults, all of us see the world continuing to change. And knowing where we can add value in that world is of critical importance. Because again, I think the world is built on human capital. It's you, it's your viewers. And I'm excited because I think the impossible is predicting needs right now, predicting what careers are going to exist, making that impossible more possible, and helping people match their work passions and their work path is essential as the world continues to change. And how do we embrace innovation and embrace change? And I think some of that is helping people navigate it. So I think this idea of right now, kids that are going to school, don't know about the potential careers. And the career counselors have an impossible job of predicting the future. So how do we handle it for organizations today that are experiencing the need to change and change the way we redeploy people, right? I mean, most of the time people stack rank and lay off the bottom of the stack rank when they see something changing the organization. That's actually, it's interesting. If the work is going to change with automation, perhaps the people that are underperforming are then going to perform. And the people that are highly performing are dealing with gaps in the business that'll be better applied to other areas of the business that have gaps as you start to increase this potential growth. So hopefully I've made it the impossible possible is predicting the future in a way that helps people build the skills that meet their passions and their path. And I think, it's within reach, right? And I think that we'll see. I mean, just like we didn't really realize when we were building web conferencing that we could move CAT scans over a 28.8 modem with no loss in quality, and it had huge applications in medicine. I think helping innovation organizations not only create the change, but deal with both the intended and unintended consequences of change is something where technology can hopefully help. And I think a lot of us are worried about AI causing the Terminator taking over Skynet and other things. I do think we have to be careful on how it's used in weapons, etc. But I think the way it's going to have the most dramatic effect on society is helping people help themselves and help organizations grow.
Well, this has just been such a wonderful conversation. Joe, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
So my email's joe@fixing.world.
Uh-huh.
You talk about an aspirational brand.
Yeah, that's great.
We'll all get there together, and I think that's the best. Or link to me on LinkedIn. I always welcome a connection, and hopefully we know some people in common. And I appreciate being on. I think the audience that you have are people that are doing the hard work of making change happen. And
yes, they are. Hear, hear to all my listeners and fellow innovators.
Yeah, hopefully, the simple solution to hard, you got to know where north is, and you've got to have an assessment criteria that works. And then it really is executing. We didn't talk about this, but executing with diverse teams. It really is about not being in a bubble. And I think that I'll leave everybody on the fact that diversity in teams, get people that disagree involved, because yes, they're difficult because you want to keep the idea and you want to keep the energy behind the idea, but you get blindsided if you don't have the difference in opinions on a team to the core. So, but thank you very much, and thank you everyone for what you do every day.
That's right.
With the way we move the world forward.
Joe Salesky, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you, Susan.